What's up everyone, it's Billiam from Everberon. Together we've spent a lot of time exploring Elden Ring on this channel. From the Deathbirds to the Empyreans, the world of Elden Ring is a fascinating and multifaceted one. The Souls games as a whole tend to present us with these vague stories which, through careful research and diligent study, reveal the truth behind events, characters, places, and scenarios of near mythological significance. Probably my favorite aspect of playing a Souls game is meeting a character or fighting a boss for the first time, having no idea what the character is about or represents, and then over time slowly realizing the gravity behind these encounters as more and more information unfolds. The way in which this honestly easy to spot and rather predictable twist is presented to the player never gets old to me, and I frequently find myself surprised and awestruck regardless of how many times I've seen such a thing before. Today's topic, however, builds off of this expectation that I think we all have, for the Souls games to be thoroughly explained beneath the surface. A notion which leads lore creators like myself to continue analyzing and exploring even after completing the game. A feat which I just managed on my livestream channel, as luck would have it. Anyway, this is the story of Elden Ring's loreless enemies. That's right, this is a lore video about creatures with no canonical lore. I hope you're as excited as I am. Without giving too much away, I think it's best to start this story off by explaining how I became interested in researching it in the first place. So let's get started. What if I told you that there's one Elden Ring boss whose significance to the story of the game remains completely unknown? That this boss was not the only one of their enigmatic kind, and that whether they know it or not, many players have seen this boss before. Some of them perhaps not having even opened up the game in the first place. To explain how this can be possible, allow me to first tell a story of how I became aware of this enigma. This all began with a message from the one and only Viper, who reached out to me in Discord with an intriguing video. Billiam, quick question. I found this video of an Elden Ring mob and I'd like to ask what it's called. The accompanying embed was from a YouTube channel called Prez, showing the player attempting a stealth attack on this strange cloaked figure, towering far above the height of the Tarnished. In the following seconds, though, we see that the uploader manages to be caught by the creature, revealing for the first time its hideous secret. Where its face should have been, there are only countless writhing worms, making way for a terrible, undulating maw. This thing eats the player, and the video ends. Now, I had remembered stumbling across something similar myself in the Altus Plateau during an earlier playthrough of the game, but unfortunately I didn't know what this particular beast was called, at the time thinking it was a standard field enemy rather than a boss, just as Viper did. I proceeded to tell him as much, adding that I would be interested to know more about this thing myself, and that I was going to take some time to look into it. I did some research on them and found little to practically nothing, said Viper. I'll admit that I was skeptical of my friend's claim at first. It didn't seem likely to me that there was really no information to be found about this strange creature. I was certain that if I could just find this being's name, I would be able to dig up at least a few lines of text pertaining to it. So I hopped on the web and started looking into what I believed at the time must be at least a passively interesting Elden Ring rabbit hole. But what I found surprised me, to say the least. I knew that these worm things could be found at the Altus Plateau, specifically near the minor Erd tree in the forested area of the region. Scrolling through the list of enemies in the area on the Elden Ring wiki, it was the very last entry which drew my attention. Lesser Wormface, it read. The Lesser Wormfaces were the enemies I remembered from my time exploring. They can be found in many areas adjacent to the Altus minor Erd tree, as far away as Mirage Rise. Often wandering aimlessly or positioned sitting or standing around corpses in the area, they can be found doing so in groups, and at least one can even be seen hunched over a grave, making these unnerving sounds. Take a listen. It certainly gives off some uncanny and, moreover, just uncomfortable vibes, that's to be sure. The Lesser Wormfaces possess ranged attacks, which deal the Deathblight status effect and mimic a sort of retching or vomiting motion. They may also attack with crude bludgeoning implements if you get too close. Finally, there are two varieties of these enemies, the first of which is seen wearing a greenish-yellow cloak covering their heads, and the other which is a naked model, bearing them in all of their disgusting glory. Now, despite all of this good information, this wasn't the being which was presented in the video Viper sent me, and I quickly realized the identity of this character as well. After all, you can't really have a lesser worm face if you don't have a worm face to begin with. Wormface is a boss who seems to act as a guardian for the minor Erdtree in this area. They can be found directly underneath the tree and adjacent to the woodfolk ruins. When discovered, Wormface can be found crouching or sitting, making strange noises and surrounded by guardians, an enemy class which, according to the description of their spears, is known to guard the minor Erdtrees, hence the name. This is our first hint that Wormface is also in the service of protecting the tree, as the guardians are passive towards it and aid it in attacking the player. Additionally, Wormface drops 2 crystal tears, as do every other boss which stands sentinel at the bottom of a minor Erdtree. Most of these take the form of Erdtree avatars, but as pointed out by God of Doge in my Discord, the Volcano Erdtree is instead guarded by an ulcerated tree spirit. Interestingly, this minor Erdtree also seems to have been destroyed at some point in the past, and I intend to get back to this point, but for now, just bear with me. Moving on, the tree in Mistwood Ruins lacks a true guardian at all, instead bearing 2 tears in a small crucible at the foot of the tree to be picked up by the player. I sent the Wormface article to Viper, and then I proceeded to query a text dump for any mentions in-game of the word Wormface. This, I must admit, is where things took a turn. Besides the plaque above the boss's health bar, nothing in the whole game exists with the word Wormface in it. Similar words like grub, worm, maggot, and the like also don't reveal anything tangentially related to Wormface or its lesser kin. This is really bizarre for a couple of reasons. First off, an enemy like Wormface that's not only a boss, but a guardian of a minor Erdtree inherently plays a rather significant part in the story of the game. What's more, it has an entire lesser enemy class based around it, who also doesn't have any lore to speak of, for the same reasons. But the thing that really stands out to me is that this character was featured in some of the very first promotional art for Elden Ring released by FromSoft. You can find this character's artwork on pretty much every major digital retailer for the game, including Steam, and this to me suggests that originally Wormface may have had a lot more story elements associated with it than we see in the final cut. This brings me to the real message of this video, the real purpose, if you will. I'm calling on us as a community of players and fans to figure out what's going on with these things, if anything at all. The first thing that I'm going to do is lay out the rest of the information that I've gathered about these guys that I haven't been given a place so far to explore. After that, I'm going to use some of that evidence, as well as some of the stuff we've talked about previously in this video, to formulate a couple of different theories about Wormface and the lesser Wormfaces, who I'll be referring to as the Worm Folk from here on out, just for ease of use. After that, it'll be up to you guys to let me know what you think in the comments. So for now, allow me to lay out a little bit more extraneous information about the Wormfolk, and then before the theory section, I'll give a formal theory warning. Now, the first thing that I want to point out in this section is that there's actually another major Wormface type enemy found on the map. It's in Mount Gelmir, and while it's not considered a boss like the one at the Altus Minor Erdtree, it is still the same enemy type, so I definitely thought I should bring it up. When you first encounter this thing, it's disguised as this flaming guy for some reason, and then only after you kill it in this form does it reveal itself to be one of the Wormfaces. Now, I didn't bring this up earlier because I didn't think it meshed well with the flow of the video thus far, but I'm bringing it up now for transparency's sake, and because, conveniently, this Wormface is located right beside the Volcano Minor Erdtree, which I brought up earlier, stating that it was the only minor Erdtree that I'm aware of which doesn't have an Erdtree avatar type guardian. Instead, it's guarded by an ulcerated tree spirit. To my knowledge, this is the only time in-game when this occurs, and what's more, the minor Erdtree itself is destroyed, it's completely gone. We're going to talk about this more in the theory section in just a minute, but for now I just wanted to bring this up and let people know that this was here. Hey, this is post-editing Billiam. So it turns out that there's at least one group of wormfolk in Farum Azula as well, and I didn't realize this at the time of recording this video. Unfortunately, I can't check this area out for myself at the moment, due to me not having a save that even is remotely close to having access to Farum Azula at the time. I just started New Game Plus on my main save on my livestream channel, so yeah. Because of this, the footage I'm using are still frames from a YouTuber who is talking about how you can cheese this group of enemies found in Farum Azula. I'll link his video in the description. Seems like a pretty lovely guy, make sure to go check him out. If it wasn't for him, not only would I not know about this, but I'm not sure as any other footage out there exists of this at all. So good for him for finding this and putting it out there. I'm not going to be talking about these in the theory section simply because I didn't know about them before creating this video, but the long and short of it is I don't really know what to think about them either way, which seems to be a theme for this enemy class. If you have a take on why these things are in Farum Azula, I'd love to hear it, so let me know. I also took into account some of the locations which existed in a similar vicinity to the Wormfolk. Specifically, Woodfolk Ruins stood out. I thought maybe querying that database with the word Woodfolk would reveal some results, but alas, it didn't. The only time the word Woodfolk appears in the game is with reference to the ruins themselves, so that's a dead end there. Within Woodfolk Ruins, one can receive the Wrath of Gold enchantment, as well as the Icon Shield, both of which seem to suggest some deeper relation between the Woodfolk and the Erdtree, or perhaps maybe the Wormfaces and the Erdtree, it's hard to say. Either way, I'm going to put those descriptions on screen now so that people can examine them at their leisure. There's another location in the vicinity of the Lesser Wormfaces though, which I mentioned previously, and that's Mirage Rise. This is a rather unique location, which can only be accessed if the player locates and dispels 3 magic seals around the area, after which the tower will reveal itself. Inside, the player can collect the Unseen Blade and Unseen Form sorceries. Both of the descriptions associated with these items describe them as one of the night sorceries of Celia, Town of Sorcery, which is an area that one can locate all the way across the map in Caelid. I'm not really sure what Mirage Rise is doing all the way over here in Altus, other than perhaps being an outpost for the Celian assassins, also mentioned in the descriptions of the unseen sorceries. But ultimately, it doesn't matter a ton for this video, I suppose, as it doesn't seem the Wormfolk really have any connection to this town of sorcery or its inhabitants. So now that I've cleared up some of the info that I know, I'm gonna start the theory section next. So if you're not interested in any of that, I suggest you skip away from the video now, move on to watch something else, or, I don't know, do whatever. But with that, I'm just gonna fire off some of these real quick, and you guys let me know what you think. One theory that may hold some merit does connect to the larger Caelid area, and that's the idea that the Lesser Wormfaces and Wormface proper are some form of the Kindred of Rot, or Pest enemy type. Many of you will probably have seen these creatures before in Caelid or in the Lake of Rot area, but maybe you didn't know what they were called. Mostly recognizable for their crustacean appearances, almost as if they're prawn of some sort. And additionally for this stupid attack that everybody hates, and it's the worst. Why? There are 2 varieties of this enemy, just like with the Wormfolk. There's the Kindred of Rot boss, found in Seathwater Cave, and there's a very common variety called Lesser Kindred of Rot, present in various areas such as the aforementioned Caelid or Lake of Rot. Thematically, Wormfolk are also rather indicative of the rotting process, with the association of worms being one of the biggest indicators. It's not difficult to imagine that these 2 species could be related in some way, but ultimately there's no information I could find that seems to confirm or deny this. Perhaps we should revisit how the Wormfolk are capable of spreading Deathblight, a status effect which, upon building up, will kill the player by sprouting a death root which impales them. This status effect seems to be linked thematically with Godwyn, now known as the Prince of Death, as the 2 talismans in-game which can mitigate Deathblight are the Prince of Death's Pustule and the Prince of Death's Cyst, respectively. Perhaps the Wormfolk are to the Prince of Death what the Kindred of Rot are to Malenia. This may even hold more merit when we consider that Wormface is one of only 3 bosses which can deal Deathblight, Lionel the Lion-Hearted, and Lich Dragon Fortisax being the other 2, both of whom are connected with the Prince of Death in some way. Fortisax being the ancient dragon who tried to fight off death within Godwyn, and Lionel being the champion of the deathbed companion Fia, whose questline is closely related to Godwyn, with the player only being able to interact with Lionel in the process of undertaking said quest. Admittedly though, there's a few common enemies which can inflict Deathblight that don't seem to be related to Godwyn at all, including the Basilisks. For the most part though, the vast majority of even these instances are connected to the Prince of Death, therefore it seems likely that so too are the Wormfolk. However, obviously this can't be confirmed. Now I know that I previously hinted about a possible connection between the Volcano Minor Erdtree and the Wormface type enemy found here. While I'm admittedly not really convinced that what I'm about to say is necessarily true or makes a whole lot of sense, in the interest of pursuing every angle, I think that this is something to consider at least. Perhaps the concept of a dying Erdtree is somehow connected with the Wormfaces. Consider how the Volcano Minor Erdtree is broken, how it's been completely destroyed and left as a stump in the middle of the land. Now consider the area where we fight Wormface as a boss. at the Altus minor Erd tree. Could this indicate that the Altus Erd tree is for some reason dying, or is in the beginning phases of decay? This might connect to what I just talked about with regards to Godwyn and the Prince of Death as well. It is known, thanks to some of the dialogue from the Death Root item, which I talked about in my Empyreans video, that the Rune of Death, and by proxy the Prince of Death, inherently have this sort of corrupting effect on the landscape. I'll link the Empyreans video if you want to hear about this more in depth, but I think that there might be some merit to the idea that the Altus minor Erd tree is in the beginning phases of decay. Just something to consider. The last theory that I want to present today is two-sided, but once again there's little if any evidence to support this, so please take it with a grain of salt. I thought it was odd that the wormfolk seem to be positioned around these corpses, all around the area where they can be found. Now I have two theories which really are opposite sides of the same coin, if that makes sense. The first is that perhaps these wormfolk, being decomposers, are eating the corpses, and this is why they're making such strange sounds. On a few of these bodies you can pick up a lump of flesh item if you loot the corpse, and this combined with one of the lesser wormface's dropped items being the gold-tinged excrement does seem to suggest that they're eating something. It's just very easy to imagine the lump of flesh to gold-tinged excrement pipeline, I suppose. That being said, whenever we see a lesser wormface around a body in-game, they don't seem to be actively eating it. They're kind of just sitting there, not really doing anything. The other theory is that maybe the wormfaces are cursed in some way. Obviously, I have no clue who would have cursed them, why, or what they would have gained out of it, but seeing them stare down in a way that could be perceived as forlornly at the dead made me wonder if, just maybe, these were their dead, as if they were once these people as well. But something happened, and now they're doomed to this unholy presence. Once again, no evidence to support that whatsoever, but at this point, anything goes. I suppose that you might be able to find a little bit more information about the wormfolk by exploring every single item which can be scavenged on a body or in this area, but frankly, I'm not sure how much more information out there is really going to be of any help to us. So for now, I think I'm going to have to end the video here. Thank you all for watching and listening to my analysis and theories regarding Wormface and the lesser Wormfaces in Elden Ring. I knew I wanted to cover this character, considering how interesting it was that they had no lore associated with them, but at the same time, I knew it wasn't going to be an easy video to make for those same reasons. I really do want to know what you guys think about this whole scenario, about the wormfolk. I never ask you guys to comment just to raise the videos up in the algorithm or whatever. I legitimately want to know what you have to say on videos like this. If you enjoyed this video, I know I mentioned it earlier, but I do have a live stream channel as well, where I frequently play Elden Ring and other games on occasion. That'll be linked in description if you want to check that out. I also have a Discord server, where I encourage you guys to come talk to us there. You can let me know your thoughts on the wormfolk over there, or really anything else. We have a great time. I've also got some socials, Twitter, Instagram, and Reddit linked in the description if you are interested in that. I'm most active on my Twitter, but I try and pay a little bit attention to all three. With all of that being said, it's Billiam from Everberon. I'm going to take off. Thank you guys for joining me today, and have a good one.